everyone, welcome to Strictly Speaking. My name is Josh Reaves. I am the director of University Theater. Tonight, we're so happy to be joining with a fellow Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music alum and fellow lighting designer, Alejandro. Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joshua. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man. Thank you for joining us. So, to begin with, like we do with every guest, we ask, what does it mean to you, Alejandro, to be a lighting designer?
That's a great question. I am someone who really loves light. I think it's such an interesting part of the production creation process because it's we in creating the world of a production, there's the spatial relationship of how the scenery, the people inhabit the space, but then the lighting is this opportunity to then sort of guide our eye through those stage pictures and direct us where we have to look. And so my work is really to find sort of the overall concepts that we're trying to share in any sort of storytelling. And I do a lot of work that is both theatrical and a very clear narrative storytelling, but I also do a lot of work that is more design driven, more commercially driven, but it still has an element of like, what is the environment that we're trying to create and how can we use lighting to transform that? So that's really how I go about my lighting design work.
Great, awesome. And tell us, how, what's a typical day for you? Let's go pre-COVID. What is a typical day for a lighting designer, and take us kind of through the process of accepting a job to, opening night.
Yeah. I do work in a variety of different arenas, and they all sort of work a little bit different. But for the most part, there's a whole contracting phase. The first thing that generally happens is this like interest and availability check, where I get a producer, or if it's for an event, I start getting some dates, getting all the contractual information about like how much time is this going to take for me to complete, and how much is the fee, and negotiating all that. And then I start my favorite processes have like a heavily collaborative energy. So we spend a lot of time in conversation about, what is this world that we're trying to build? And sometimes, in something like theater, something that is like text driven, there's a lot more of like digging into the script, digging into conversations with the director and the playwright, trying to see what they're envisioning with the world. When it comes to dance or some of the site specific stuff that I make, it's also about really understanding what the space is and which ways are like both exciting for me to alter that space, or what does the production, the event, the whatever it is need in terms of lighting for me to be able to like find those anchors that are exciting to me. And then begins all the formal prep work, which is, drafting a light plot, checking the inventory. And all of this, there's a big range, whether you're working in a theater company that has a set inventory, or whether you're renting, there's a whole, and then there's this whole other budgeting process of how much is it going to cost to get the equipment, to get the labor, to put all these events, to just organize all of these events.
Oh, yeah.
So there's this whole prep period of coming up with those concepts. And for me, I work a lot from home. A lot of it is just getting all the files in, making sure I have updated scenic drawings and venue drawings, making sure I have all this equipment. And then gets to the actual production phase, which is my favorite phase, and really like focusing and actually seeing what the lights do in the space. And sometimes I have very clear ideas of what I'm looking for. And sometimes I'm doing a show where I don't have a lot of equipment. So I need to figure out how to make as few lights as possible have the biggest effect. So I really enjoy that part that is the actual experimentation. And in that regard, I like enjoy processes where I do have the opportunity to like explore and to tech and light things in a lot of different ways. And that gets us through production, the tech process, which I do enjoy because it's when the work happens, but also tends to be the most stressful. And then into, if it's theater work, the preview process of like, on our end of the production, we've like done all this work, and now we need to bring an audience in and see how they're engaging with the work, what is working, what is not working, if there's any ways that I can refine what I'm doing to just help the overall production.
Gotcha. So yeah, I got a couple of things I want to hit on, and thank you for that. I mean, I know it's an extended process, and so I want to hear first from you. Do you gravitate, or do you find yourself enjoying, the text-based theater, or traditional scripted theater, or dance work, or any site-specific work in which you are kind of creating that narrative and or that emotion or whatever it may be, with your collaborators?
That's a great question. So my background, like getting, around college and early career work, was really theater driven, like text-based driven. In the summers when I was in Cincinnati, I would go to summer stock, the Williamstown Theater Festival, which is really new play based. And that's a big part of our work here in New York is this sort of off-Broadway network that is, a lot of it is like new play development. A lot of it is contemporary stories. There's a lot of realism. And that's sort of the world that I started working on when I moved to New York as an assistant. And it's interesting for me for sure, but the process of it, these like long-term tech processes, it's hard to make a living in the theater world because there's very few theaters that have like the budget to really pay a significant fee. So as I started moving into my own design work, I had to like really layer in where I was getting work from, how many shows I was doing at the same time. And I was feeling a lot of constraints because of that. So that's how I started spreading out to some other industries. And to me, what I've discovered is that is actually the most sustainable way of working, is where I do, a play here, and then I go do a dance festival somewhere or a dance tour, and then I go, work an event or work a festival or something like that. Because each one is like very different kinds of stress. And there are things that I love and hate about those jobs and about that stress. Like I'm someone who like was really taught to, a lot of my early work was like in highly competitive and very sort of stressful environments. So I like really thrive with stress, but it also, like, burnout is super real, and I really need to manage what kinds of stresses I'm taking in. So the reality is that there's elements that I love about all these different styles of production work and performance work. And what really makes it valuable for me is being able to navigate through a lot of different ones. That also, like, I got really good at navigating my stress that way by bouncing around different things, to the point that I was then, like, the burnout got that much bigger at the end of these like long chunks of work. So I'm definitely especially after this pause due to COVID, I'm like really trying to figure out, okay, what is my work relationship? How do I go back to some of these environments where I can still get the creative excitement that I really enjoy about my work, but I'm also taking care of my body and my mental health and just be able to do this for every day and every week and so on.
Well, Alejandro, I'd like to press a bit further with that. Can you, and to the extent that you feel comfortable, explain or tell me about what part of the process, or what did you find that was, you mentioned the tech process is very stressful. What about a designer, especially a lighting designer, that you find stressful at sometimes? Is it the time constraint? Is it the, for me, it's usually the time constraint in the
yeah. That's a great question, because it's a couple of different things, especially with the theater work. The time our schedules are very, very intense. There's a big push right now to end, sort of the professional standard of the 10 out of 12 rehearsals. And that's like one of the things that I'm the most confident will change after this pandemic, because there's been a lot of advocacy around that. And it's for sure a big part of it, because the 10 out, so 10 out of 12 is 10 hours of rehearsal out of a 12-hour day, but that applies to the actors. We still have this like work note session in the morning and a production meeting at night. So it easily becomes, 14, 15-hour days. So doing that, week after week, every month is something that I just really, it just takes a toll on you.
Yeah.
And for me specifically, one of the big parts of that is being in a dark room every day and not seeing sunlight is really, really challenging.
Yeah.
But it also like, so when I started shifting out away from assisting in the way that like I was sort of taught was the sort of natural flow of the career. As I started moving away from assisting and designing my own work, I was getting a lot of offers for small pieces that were these very intense schedules, maybe a week or two, not a lot of budget. So a lot of it was like me having to do the hanging, the focusing, all this work. And it really made me design from sort of from whatever was easiest, instead of being able to dig into like, what is creative about this? How can I challenge myself? Or like, what are the avenues for creativity on this project? I was like, great, I need visibility. I need a backlight. I know R83 is like the beautiful blue color so like all of my shows would look fairly similar, because I knew that it was just like those tips were just a good way of getting a good variety of looks and making it exciting. So I started, that was really sort of a limit for me. It was limiting my creativity. And it's made me sort of reach out for other places to work. And in my case, that the sort of first path outside of that was starting to do lighting for Fashion Week here. There's a lot of, twice a year, and for a part it was 4 times a year. It was like a lot of work that pays really well, is much more commercial, and I had been doing that as an electrician, from when I started moving to New York. But then maybe 6 years ago, the company that I was working for needed some new assistants, and I jumped into the design side of that. And it was really interesting because it's a totally different process. It's creatively, there's not a lot there, yeah, exactly. Even like design wise, it's a very technical form of lighting, because it's really about, math and physics. It's like, how can I make the most even brightness along this entire runway? And you do get some opportunity for some sort of exciting shows, but really those are like bigger budget shows that are bringing in international designers anyways.
Gotcha. Well, yeah. Hey, okay. So let's, and thank you for hitting on that. I agree. It's the schedule for me was always the stressful part.
Yeah.
And I agree with you too. The 10 out of 12, I think has its days are numbered. Yeah. So talk to us. Okay. Fashion Week. So you've been designing in New York, assisting, and first off, what is Fashion Week? And you started off as an electrician, moved to the design, but what do you do for them?
Yeah. So Fashion Week, Fashion Week happens all over the world. There's New York Fashion Week, which is where I work, but then there's Paris, Shanghai, London, Milan. There's like there's a network of markets where these fashion designers are trying to showcase their new lines. And based on the success of that is sort of determines what the fashion trends are. And really what it is a whole bunch there's a couple of different styles of fashion shows. There's, runway shows, which we're all fairly, that exists in the culture of the US fairly frequently. Zoolander, like that is totally, what it is. There's a runway, models come in, they do a walk. And then these are very short shows. Typically they're like 10 or 15 minutes. But they throw a ton of money into it because that's how they get magazines to publish about their clothes. That's how they get people to buy the clothes, or contracts up front. So these designers like are really trying to make a statement. A lot of the like traditional designers also have like an image that they're trying to keep with these shows. So we come in. So sorry, I mentioned the first runway shows, and then there's also presentation shows where it's more of like an open space with models in the clothes and people come in and out. So a bulk of the work that I do in that is coordinating for other designers, which is good because it means that I can work on some of the bigger shows, and sometimes they're really taking over entire blocks of the city. Michael Kors just did one a couple of weeks ago here in New York where they shut down part of Times Square and had this like runway down the middle of 42nd Street. So generally you get a lot of like big sort of conceptual ideas. And as I was saying earlier, lighting wise, a lot of it is like, what is the environment? How do you make this like really a dream-like environment? And then for the shows themselves, it's like, how do you light the models in bright ways with good contour so that the photographs and the video that is being taken is can just like with minimal editing get sent out to the blogs, because that's how this all happens is like you load in for 2 days, then you do a quick rehearsal with the models. You never see the clothes, so you don't really know like what the colors are going to look like under the light, but you just make sure that there's no hot spots or dark spots. Yeah. And then all of a sudden there's a 15-minute runway show, and within half an hour, the photos are online. So you need to really create, lighting that is very even, that is very soft, or not, or whatever, whatever the concept is. Because there are some designers that do a really good job of playing with that, of like, how do you use shadow yet still see the clothes and stuff like that.
And are the designers working directly with and designer, I mean by the lighting designer, working directly with the fashion designer in the moment, or are they coming in predetermined what the look's going to be?
They come in with some pretty good ideas. So when we design our own shows, we don't always deal with the fashion designer themselves. Generally, some of these companies have a creative director who is like the person that has the vision. And then they hire a producer who shepherds that vision, right? So the producer is the one that we're most in contact with. And they know, what we need. They want to see, like a design deck. So some research from us and some inspiration images and stuff like that. With these bigger shows, I work a lot with the company of a French lighting designer who does really, really beautiful shows. He does all of the major shows. And he really has the idea. And he's the kind of lighting designer that really sort of creates, uses lighting to create space in really interesting ways. One of my favorite shows of his, they've done in a couple of different places. They did it here on Liberty Island with the backdrop of the Statue of Liberty. But they also, the Paris one, which is a very similar show, had the Eiffel Tower in the background. And he had like 200 moving lights on the floor, just making these amazing like walkways of light that moved around with the models. And it was really, really impressive. And so he comes in with those concepts. He tells us like, sends us his drawings and his equipment list and stuff like that. And then our job is to sort of like deal with the rental shops here, try to get as close as possible to the equipment that he's speccing as we can, and figure out all the logistics of power, of labor, of rentals, of, moving things from one venue to the other and coordinating all of that.
Wow. Okay. Well, okay, let's step back to, you had left college, you started working, and you said that you followed the traditional path of a New York designer, starting out with assisting. Can you tell us what exactly does an assistant lighting designer do? And, is that the typical path for most New York designers?
Yeah, this is definitely, and you might have, I'd be curious your thoughts on it too. But I definitely feel that in Cincinnati we were presented with certain tracks that people could pursue. We had a really good dance program, and I didn't really participate much in that at CCM in Cincinnati. And then the theater program was really built around this idea of like the pathways to Broadway. And I, of course, then like went to Williamstown Theater Festival, which is a place where a lot of the off-Broadway theater work or theater workers go for the summer. So that really was like what got me into this particular style of lighting design. I do think that the most common path is like, you cut, and this is like someone moving to New York specifically, I'd say. You come to the city, you start meeting some folks. I at Williamstown had worked with a few lighting designers, but I had spent a lot of time and worked in a lot of different positions with Ben Stanton, who's an off-Broadway and Broadway lighting designer. So by the time I moved to New York, Ben and I had a really good relationship, and it was an easy transition to start helping him with the shows here in New York. And the scale is similar to what we were working on at Williamstown. So I already had sort of like an understanding of what this size show, what it took to put up this size show. And that's, those responsibilities really are that, again, it's like a prep period where, depending on sort of the technical fluency of the designer, there's some designers who like give you a rough plot and it's like literally just notes on paper, or they take the scenic ground plan and they're just like, I want some side light from over here and some front light from over here in these colors. And then it's your responsibility to draft that, really clean it up so the information is all easy to see. Create all the hookups, the channel hookup, the instrument schedule, all this paperwork to help the electrician also hang the show. And then just in the tech process, it turns into like what I always really enjoyed about it. And I've really only assisted two people sort of heavily, Ben and a dance lighting designer named Clifton Taylor. So for me, the perspective was really, how can I anticipate what they need? Yeah. So like, if they can't remember a channel, like how can I like anticipate what channels they're going to be calling up? How can I help? One of the responsibilities is creating the magic sheet. So knowing like, how do they think about lighting, and how should I lay out this magic sheet so that they can know where to look to find the channels that they need. And yeah, so it's really like a support, taking a lot of notes, communication with the electrician, being able to say like, these are the changes that we want. And doing that, like it does become a skill, because you really need to know how the designer communicates, and need to be able to know like what they mean when they say, focus this light. Do they want you to focus? Are they going to focus it? All these different things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's exactly. I was handed quite a few yellow sheets from Thomas Hoff going, hey, I just want these channels. Go away and turn into a plot.
Yes, exactly.
Well, let's talk a bit about, today and how the world has changed. How are the events of the world today influenced your work, both practically, like what you actually do and from day to day, but also, are you approaching the work differently from an artistic, different artistically, a different artistic eye?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has been obviously like a really challenging time with such few opportunities to work. I've been able to find a little bit of work during this time, but it has become sort of different. After years of like not really assisting, I came back. Ben Stanton again asked me to help him on. We were doing sort of a theatrical production of A Christmas Carol that they were filming for a digital release. So like in that was like a very clear example of like, we are going to put on a show in a very traditional theater tech process, but we're doing it for a camera, which becomes a whole, we basically had like 2 weeks or a week and a half of like teching a theater piece that we like then presented to the director of photography, and he watched it, and then we had 2 weeks with a crew, or a week and a half with a crew, and they came in to say, at that point we're like looking at a monitor instead of looking with your eyes, which is a big difference. Eyes and cameras just capture things very differently. So that's a way that like the same work is done very differently. And since then I've had a couple of shows that I've designed myself where it's like, I did a couple of productions with the New School here in New York where I was teching like right here from my desk, and I had a Discord server to communicate with the programmer who was in a theater in Manhattan. And then I had a Zoom feed of like the different cameras that we were using. And I just was like, calling up channels via Discord and lighting it that way. And since then I've also done a production where I was designing in person with an audience. And so I'm still like sitting in the room creating this composition for the space, but we were also streaming it. So I also had the monitor and had to balance like, how does this look in reality versus how does it look on camera?
And how did that work? Trying to make that. Did you find it very difficult, or did it come pretty easy?
Yeah. Working on camera is something that comes really easy because that's like in the fashion work, that's like really what I'm doing is like, what are it is different, like the things that affect the quality of the capture are different, in reality versus on camera. So I already sort of understood what things are important for that, like what the color balance on camera becomes really important, and colors read very differently on camera. So being able to anticipate some of those things is something that I felt a little bit prepared for. What was harder, in particular in the show that I teched from home, is that process, communication became very different, because we can't, I can't step over to the director and like ask him a question or ask them a question. And I can't, the scenic designer's responsibility was very different. So we really didn't have a conversation about like the physicality of the space, because when we were thinking about it on capture to camera, it like really is just about like what this like two-dimensional frame is going to capture. So it's for sure a very different process.
Ooh, well, thank you for that as well. So let's say, whether it be this year or before, what's your most exciting or favorite project to date?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have.
It's like they're all your babies.
Well, exactly. It's like what I've really enjoyed about sort of the shift that I found in my career. Mm-hmm. It's like I don't. There's very few of like the fashion shows that I've done that I'm like, wow, that is like a really beautiful work. But what it's allowed me to do is take more performance work that I maybe wouldn't have been able to spend as much time and energy on and really dive into them. So I think that my like dance work has gotten a lot better because I've just been, like with technology, like now that we have LED work, mm-hmm. playing with color becomes really exciting for me. So I've really been, there's a few projects that I really like. There's a dance company that I work with called Mishiyaya Dance, and it's two artistic directors that are both choreographers and dancers, but they're also like artists. They paint and they do a lot of digital art. So they're really interesting. If I go in there and I'm like, I really think that this piece is like emerging from this like really heavy muck of like blue or whatever, they're like really excited to dive into that. Right. Whereas, in theater, we really have these like needs for visibility and for like how the lighting fits into the storytelling. So I think my favorite work come from these places where I can really like dig into abstraction and find moments where we can sort of really dig into some color. Some of the work that I've been doing recently, and this ties a little bit to the last question of like what has been changing in the during
Yeah.
this period, through COVID and through this big pause. There's been a lot of really great community building. I'm in a lot of sort of community networks here in New York that are starting to have a lot of conversations about how do we go about our work? Um, can we how can we make changes in some of these things that make it hard to be a designer? Like, how can we ask for more money? How can we organize better, as a community? And the very first step of that is like, how can we build a community? Because the thing about lighting design is that there's, on a project, there's generally one lighting designer who might have a team, of other folks who are, in their own journeys about being lighting designers or lighting professionals. But it doesn't really create an environment where we can get to know each other and get to collaborate about, hey, this is how I view my work, and this is what I don't like about this industry, and what I would like to change. So there's been a really good time for designers to sort of empower themselves a little bit in ways that we didn't have access to before. And for me, that has been tying into this interest in a variety of different art forms. So now I'm excited about like, what does it look like when we create performances where the designer is part of the sort of core group of authors of the piece? And in that regard, I've been doing over the past few years, I've been designing these escape rooms or immersive games, where I'm able to like, we have a narrative arc that we're following, but I'm really just like creating these interesting environments for people to navigate. Yeah, this is a project that I just did in Montana, and this is like during COVID. You can see everyone's wearing their mask. We were tasked with creating an experience, an immersive experience for one pot at a time. And what we were really excited about was the opportunity to let people explore a theater and explore what the sort of community role of a theater is. This is in a very small ski resort town. And a lot of these folks have been members of the audience, but they don't often get an opportunity to like walk on stage to see the sort of environments that exist on stage. So for me, it was really about like creating this like, and I was the production designer of it. So I did the scenic design and the lighting design. So how do we create this environment that holds this performance? Because at the end there was sort of this light and sound performance that the guests were able to witness. So like, how do we create an environment for them to navigate and for them to interact with, that grows, that tells a story, that is exciting, and that shows them all this sort of like back end parts of being a theater and being in the theater.
And so is, can you tell us a bit about first off, what is immersive, an immersive experience, immersive theater?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's hard to find the right words for it, because it's like many words. So immersive comes from like the idea that you as an audience member are participating in like the three-dimensional environment of the piece. It became really popular here in New York. There's a show called Sleep No More that I think is probably about 10 years old now. That is, it's a take on Macbeth, but happens in sort of like the 20s and in this hotel, and you can just like wander around this building and walk in and out of scenes. So that's sort of like not the first show, this is concept that is like goes on forever. But it really got this new energy about immersive shows. And since then there's a lot of different things that have come out that are sort of this idea of like, what does it look like when we get rid of the separation between what the performance is and what the audience is? Because there is this really interesting dynamic, and I'm someone who believes in like a very loose definition of what theater is, because there is for sure sort of like a traditional canon of theater, but there's also a lot of things that don't exist within that. And for me, it really comes down to like, what is this environment between the the performance, and as you can see, like that show that we just showed photos of, there was no actors in that. That was just them exploring a space. But as they explore the space, they're like doing things, and basically like we created these somewhat scenes that they just navigate by trying to solve these puzzles. And on the other hand, it also, like in greater immersive shows, obviously this was created for small pods, but one of the things that I do for work is I do site lighting for music festivals, and to me that is like also theater, and it's theater at a totally different scale, because again, you're not really like highlighting one story, but you're designing the environment where 100,000 people are coming with their groups of friends to see the music they love, to see the art that they love, to have fun. And it does create a performance. We did, I work with a friend of mine doing this work. And a few years ago, we were tasked with trying to get people to move. This was a big urban music festival in Las Vegas. So they closed down a part of downtown Vegas, and they have, it's, I think 150,000 guests or something. So they have very specific paths that they want people to move through, most of which are like the actual streets, but then there's these alleys that they tasked us to like light up a little bit for people to feel comfortable going through. And we created an installation of like 100 moving lights doing this, like, again, lighting and sound experience. But it became really interesting to watch that and watch guests walk through this alley. And, we had these beams and all this fog in the air. So you really saw like all the beams of light, and people are like navigating and sort of like secret spy moving through the beams of light, and I just like couldn't help but watch that and be like, this is theater. Like I could sit here and be an audience member and just watch people interact with these lights. And there's like what that actually is. There's no script. It's
people watching.
Exactly. Yeah.
Produced people watching. I love it.
Exactly.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I mean, you talked about, immersive work. You've talked about, coming together as a community. I also saw in your bio about you are currently serving as the co-chair on the diversity committee for USA 829. First off, can you tell us a bit about what USA is, 829 is, and but also talk to us about the work of your fellow committee members and what you're doing for USA and the industry as a whole?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So USA 829 is United Scenic Artists 829 is a local of IATSE. So IATSE is a really large it's international union here in the States and in Canada that covers entertainment workers. And this is like Hollywood, theater, all over the country, entertainment work, entertainment production work. And this, so that union, that large union is split into locals, and most locals cover sort of regional work. So like Local 1, the first local of IATSE, is the stagehands, the technicians of Manhattan specifically. And that, so the local focuses on like organizing the contracts, the benefits for union members of that particular local in that particular work. USA 29 is a local that covers theatrical designers across the country. So a lot of the IATSE locals are regional. We are nationwide. And we cover theatrical design by categories: costume, scenic, lighting, projections, sound. And then we also cover some film and TV work in the New York area. And that is limited to the New York area because there's locals that do all this nationwide work as well. So it has been a really, as I mentioned a little bit of this earlier, but it's been this really interesting time for people to voice their opinions about how we should be protected in this industry. There's a lot of concern that with the financial crisis around COVID, that theaters are going to go back on some contracts or try to reduce rates, things like that. So it is a really important time for us to be able to like have conversations about what we need. Our local in particular is a pretty strong local. We've had it had like continuous leadership for the past like 25 years that really focus on workplace safety and on developing sort of the financial benefits of the union. So as a union member, every contract that I do that is on a union contract, and there are some unions where you can only work union contracts. USA isn't really that strict, but it is beneficial to me to put as much work as I can on a union contract, because that means I have access to, part of my paycheck then goes into a pension fund for when I retire. Part of my paycheck goes into my health insurance. Depending on the contracts, I could be able to pay into a 401k for additional retirement money. So there's a lot of benefits of being in a union. And right now we're trying to really organize to really push what that member, like what those benefits should look like and what those protections in the workplace should look like. We haven't actually released it, but our off-Broadway agreement just got renegotiated, which changed a lot of like what goes into that contract. In the diversity committee, we really are focusing. We have been focusing on a lot of things. It's become very clear that there's a lot of systemic racism in this industry. And especially in New York, where we see a lot of commercial work, we see a lot of attempts of people to sort of, underpay or we're like starting to try to understand like, how is this inequity spread in this, it's specifically in our industry and specifically in our work circles. And that's sort of hard to do without knowing what the demographics of our industry are. So one of the big projects that we've been pushing within USA is having a census of our membership so that we can know how people identify in terms of their race and their ethnicity, their gender, their sexual orientations, just so that we know like where do we have blind spots, like who do we need to support more. So that's been this ongoing process that we've been rolling out. Right now, we have about half of our membership has filled out our census, and we're working on getting reports out. So the goal of this is that then we can be able to say like, look, Broadway, you're hiring 80% white designers. We really want you to push to hire more diverse designers. So how can we work together to put that into the contracts or put some steps toward that into the contract? And part of that is looking at our own organization and seeing the biases that exist. So we did not have very diverse leadership, and every year we have union elections. So the diversity committee last year for our union elections did a lot of work to try to get some BIPOC designers and coordinators and entertainment workers into our executive board, and we've been able to make some progress. I'm sure that's going to keep on going. There's a lot more interest. For a long time, people were able to just like, people weren't. It wasn't that people weren't engaging with the union. It was that there was really not an invitation to see the union as an extension of its members. So what we've been really trying to push is like, how can we create space for people to participate? How can we listen to what members have to say and take that into account when we organize? And the diversity committee, part of this leadership change was there was a lot of like organizational stuff that wasn't really well cared for within our local. So we had been a committee for a few years, for I think 5 or 6 years now. And over the past year, we've worked with the union to sort of help them organize some other committees. So now we have like an education committee, an admissions committee, a sustainability committee. so that we can really start taking these like personal concerns of our members and turn them into policy. And then we also have like really casual things too. One of the things that I do is I organize a book club, which used to be just for our members, and we've just extended for non-members. And again, it's like all about creating a casual space for us to. We're focusing on reading fiction work, but from BIPOC authors. So just to like create a platform where we can have some conversations about different perspectives in a casual way.
There's your invite too. If reaching out outside the union, that's great. And
yeah, and
that kind of work is being done. That's awesome.
Yeah, really, one of the biggest struggles of our particular local is communication, and this is something like both internally. It was hard to get information. It was the way our newsletter went out was sort of like an archaic method, and so there was definitely like room for improvement in how we organize within the local. But it also, that lack of transparency and lack of communication also created a lot of trust issues with people outside of the union. So we're really working now to like, how can we bridge this gap? We've started doing some information sessions for non-members that go into details of like, what is a union? Like what are we organized around, and things like that. Cool. And it really feels like a time of community building in a really good way.
Well, I mean, like you said, this pause we've had, at some point you have to hit replay. So why not, make some changes while we're here?
Exactly.
So I do have a question for you. A couple more. We just got a few more minutes left. Was there a class that you took, perhaps a theater class, non-design class, but a class that you found to be invaluable to your career today?
That is a really good question.
And I ask that because we're a STEM university and, we're not a majors program, but like for those students who are, looking to go into the arts that are a business degree major, was there a math class that like, oh man, I can do my taxes now, or I don't know, something like that?
Yeah. Well, I never took a true business class, and I wish I had. Like Cincinnati, that we were a conservatory, so we really focused on design. And I actually think that the classes that I took that were really valuable for my, let's say, creative philosophy, right? So like how I see the world, I actually transferred to Cincinnati. I went to NYU for 1 year for a program called Gallatin, which is all about individualized studies. So you create your own concentration. And they had the classes from that program were designed to be interdisciplinary. And for me, that became so valuable to be able to like understand that there's multiple lenses from which to view a topic. CCM accepted credits for this class, and it blew my mind because I had a class called The Thingliness of Things that was literally about like how humans relate to objects. And it's something that I, to this day, think about all the time, because it talked about like capitalism and communism. It talked about art and ethics. It talked about commodities and art objects. It talked about so many different interactions of like how humans see the world around them. And CCM accepted it as a philosophy class, and I was like, I guess that makes sense. but I really value education as a whole, and for me, learning new things and learning something from every experience is really important, and I do think that having access to those classes that were about like thinking about the world in multiple frameworks at the same time became really valuable, because at the end of the day, like I'm not just an artist because I need my art to pay my bills and to save for my future. And even like as a theater maker, I am for sure a creative person, and I love creatively diving into projects. But the reality of what that looks like is that I need to be organized. I need to be a good critical thinker. I need to be a good problem solver. I need to know how to handle my stress. So every interaction, everyone that I know, every experience is a learning experience. I like really try to approach things in that way. Because I think it's important to know, I think it's important to know yourself. Right. And that just takes like critical thinking about like, what does that mean? Like, and that can be scary to like dive down to like, oh, why am I feeling this way? Like, why am I, why am I reacting to this way? Why am I attracted to this? And really being able to like understand your thought process, so that you can like listen to your body and listen to your mind and navigate, while taking care of yourself.
Well, I hope that this time away is quieted things enough so that we can actually listen to that stuff. So that's, yeah. I agree.
And hopefully we can create space,
yes,
as part of just our industry, yeah, to be able to listen, which is, I'm like really fighting. Things are starting to come up in my calendar. I'm like, great, I've got projects over the next couple of months, but that also means I'm going to block off these free weeks as free weeks, because I can't just like do what I normally do, which is like fill it all with work.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's like, I keep hearing this at the beginning of the pandemic. It was when it's not going back to normal, it's going forward to a new normal, Yeah. All right. So we have our one last question for the night. We ask this of every guest. What one piece of advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career such as yours?
I think reach out to people. Like really consider, I think really my greatest piece of advice is what I just said, which is like, I was gonna
say, I feel like you got to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Learn about yourself. Like think about what your interests are, what your needs are, what makes you happy. Like think about the things that you need, because it's really important to be able to like identify what you like and what you don't like, and be able to navigate in those directions. But then especially with work stuff, as you develop as you find those things that really interest you, if you're someone who's always liked movies, gaffers are lighting designers for movies, like you really, there is so many different applications of lighting design. It's literally everywhere around us. So really being able to like recognize for yourself what that interest is, and then reach out to the people, research those industries, research the people doing those work, and reach out to them, because that is like really, we work in a collaborative industry, and it is an industry, but it is also like a humanity, it's also about like human connections, making friends, making collaborators. And to start those conversations off, you need to know how to just like begin talking to someone. So, listen out for what you like and what you're interested in. Research what those things are and who's doing work that you relate to, and then reach out to those people for work or for a conversation. And they're really, every experience is a chance to learn, and you can learn so much from different people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if y'all want to reach out to Alejandro, I'm putting his website's contact in the chat. So Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you everyone for coming out and listening to this amazing person I haven't seen in like, oh my gosh, 10 years almost.
Decade, for sure.
Wow. So I hope you're doing well, man, and wish you the best. Alejandro, have a great night, man. All right, take care.
Thanks, Joshua. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, man.